Many of us are just donors to the Rotary Promise Scholarship, but he has really put some meat on the bones, and it's so vital. And you're inspiring me to get down to Western High School in Iroquois to help you. Thank you for what you do. Well, I'm delighted to be part of the program today. Back in December, I attended an educational conference called Fast Forward Summit with our speaker, Michael Gritton, who certainly needs no introduction because I think he knows more people in the room than I do. But he, along with Mary Gwen Wheeler, spoke at this conference in December, as I mentioned, relating to the status of our major community initiative, the 55,000 degree program. And I was so impressed with his presentation that I urged him to come today. Michael's been at the helm of and executive director for 13 years of Kentuckiana Works, which I think you all know is our region's major workforce development board, which administers numerous employment programs and training programs. As you know, our region needs many, many more skilled workers, and Kentuckiana Works is the key to that magic. We have all heard over years Mayor Fisher and his predecessors plea for private employers to employ summer jobs for bring summer jobs to 16 and 21-year-olds. It's the Summer Works program, and that's only one of 4 principal programs that Michael and his staff administer. On a personal note, Michael is a local product, a graduate of Pleasure Ridge Park High School, Duke University, and Columbia University Law School. He's I think, a perfect model for a person returning back to home after 20 years in New York and Boston and giving back to leadership in our community. In his spare time, he enjoys basketball, as he says, chasing kids half his age around the court, and also golf. He and his wife have 2 children. One is a senior at YPass who plays in a very cool band, maybe join us someday, called Pocket Change, and a younger son who's a freshman at Collegiate. As you know, his birthday is today, and I'm really grateful Michael could join us. Please, welcome Michael Gritton. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Well, President Gregg and members of the Rotary, thank you very much. I want to start just by saying thank you to my friend Henry for that warm introduction. And he is one of the examples to people like me of the way when you're living in Louisville that you try to think every day, what am I doing to try to make this place a better place, whether it's the Vote Scholarship, the Vote Awards, whether it's the leadership he's doing around trees and the tree canopy. He is just one of the great citizens of Louisville. So Henry, we salute you and appreciate that very much. He snuck in the Duke thing, and I don't want to talk about that very long. And I want to warn the cameraman in advance, I asked for a lavalier mic because I'm going to try to pace around a little rather than standing in one place. So hopefully that will be okay. What I wanted to do is talk to you a little bit in the frame of March Madness. So for anybody who isn't a basketball fan, bear with me. But here's the frame that I wanted to try to use. I wanted to get you to think a little bit in my presentation. I'm going to talk to you a little about the economy and about the workforce. But I wanted you to think a little bit about what the difference is between Western Kentucky University's basketball program and the University of Connecticut's program. I'm a basketball kid, right? I grew up in Louisville, so I followed this stuff since the 70s. And Western Kentucky has always had a pretty nice basketball team. And every now and then they do something extraordinary. They made the Final Four in the 70s. They made the Sweet 16 not that long ago. And when they do, basketball fans like me are not completely surprised. You say to yourself, Western is a nice place. They take their basketball seriously. It doesn't surprise me they would do something good. There are lots of other teams in their conference you would never expect to do anything. But at the end of the day, when you think about making out your brackets year to year, who's going to win the championship, you don't think much about Western Kentucky, right? 30 years ago, I think University of Connecticut was more or less in the same situation. I had never heard of them. They may have done something every now and then, but it was extremely episodic, not something you would ever think about. And then somewhere along the line in the late 80s, early 90s, University of Connecticut went from being a place you had never heard of and you never thought about being a basketball program to essentially being a basketball power, right? And in the last 12 years, I believe they've won the national championship 3 times, including the one time they won against UK a couple of years ago, which we were all mad about, right? And they're consistently now at the top of that kind of category. So as I described to you a little bit about what's happening in workforce development, the economy, talent, what I want you to think about is, are we going to position Louisville? What is it we're going to do to make Louisville's talent development system more like UConn's and less like Western's? And if the metaphor is tired by the end, my friend Mark Worms is clearly going to tell me that. So So I'm counting on you, Mark, if it doesn't work. So let me start off by just giving you a couple of basic things, and I don't have too many slides, but I've just got a couple pictures that I think are really helpful. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. My dad was a factory worker at Ford. My Uncle Danny was a factory worker at GE. I didn't know at the time, I sort of knew it but didn't know it statistically, the average wages that were paid for jobs in Louisville back in the 70s were above the national average. On that chart that says 1.0, that horizontal line is the national average. And all through the 70s and into the early 80s, the average wages that were paid in Louisville were above the national average. So kids like me benefited from guys like my dad being able to live a middle-class life in Louisville with a high school degree working at Ford, right? But somewhere around the mid-'80s, that average wage line dropped below the national average, and you've heard Mayor Fisher talk about that. We've now been below that line for 30 years. And that number, that chart is not moving in the right direction. It's not moving up, right? This is a problem for us. This is something we have to try to figure out. We can't succeed as an economy if that's what it looks like. Now, this chart has too many lines, but again, I want a picture to tell a story for you. When you look at this chart, on the left-hand side is 1990, right? And on the right-hand side is 2014. So as you're moving along, this is the size of the economy, the number of people that are working, both in Louisville and in some of our competitor cities. So Louisville is the sort of, I think we're the sort of orangest line in the middle. And what you'll see is in 1990, Nashville, which is the blue line, basically had 49,000 more people working in Nashville than we did in 1990. So in 1990, Nashville was a little bigger than Louisville, but not so much bigger that you wouldn't think of them as somebody that we weren't competing with, because we were. But if you look 25 years later, the size of the Nashville economy now is almost 300,000 jobs larger than Louisville's. That's a big deal. Nashville has become Yukon, right? They have raised their game and kept it at a level that we have not, right? When you look at the other chart that's even farther up than Nashville, that orange line, that is Austin, Texas. In 1990, the number of jobs in Austin, Texas was lower than the number of jobs in Louisville. But 25 years later, Austin, Texas, in 25 years, added more jobs to the Austin economy than we had jobs in 1990. That's how fast they've grown, right? When you look down at the bottom, there's a little squiggly brown line that starts at the very bottom that's trended up that's now bigger than Louisville's. That's Raleigh, North Carolina. Not Raleigh, Chapel Hill, Durham, just Raleigh, right? Started out way down there in 1990, and 25 years later is now larger, has more jobs than Louisville. Now, the good news is we're not a flat line. Our line is moving up slowly to the right. The good news is cities like Dayton have actually seen their lines move down. So we're not in a crisis. It's not terrible, right? Every now and then something good is happening. But the pace of growth and change is not good enough for what we want. And this is another way of demonstrating the same data. So what you're seeing again is at the far right, you see cities like Austin and Portland and Charlotte that have worked these miracles over the last 25 years in terms of the size of their economy, how many jobs they're growing, and as they're adding these jobs, their average wages are also moving up, right? And Louisville is not at the far left, which is good, and we've made some progress, so I don't mean to be negative, but all I'm saying is as a kid who grew up here and lived in other places for 20 years and came back, we don't want to be flyover land. We want to be a place that people notice, and the way to be noticed is to generate the kind of growth that Nashville and Charlotte have generated that in the last 25 years we have not. And that's the challenge we face as a community going forward. So now what I want to shift to is I want to try to stay in my lane as much as I can. I'm the workforce guy, right? So I'm supposed to know something about talent. What do we need? Where's it going to come from? When you look at where the jobs are going to grow in the next 10 years in our economy, and when I keep talking about Louisville, I really mean the 12-county metropolitan statistical area, southern Indiana and Louisville and the 6 counties around it. It turns out that more than 2/3 of the jobs that are going to pay what we consider to be a living wage line, which is sort of $45,000 a year, MIT does something called the living wage calculator. And for Louisville, they estimate for a family of 4, you need to make $45,000 a year. So just as a rough number, that's what we're using, right? It turns out that more than 2/3 of all the jobs that are going to grow in the next 10 years that are going to pay above that wage line are in 5 sectors. So for the nephew who's trying to figure out what sector to get into, healthcare, business and finance, management, Computer and math and sales and related occupations is 2/3 of that list, right? Now, it doesn't mean, because I'm going to talk about manufacturing in a second, because we do have some good things going on in other sectors, but if we're thinking about where the growth is going to come from, so again, I work for Mayor Fisher and the county judges in the region. The mayor is so focused on trying to generate an innovation economy because these are the innovation jobs that pay well, right? And what we're going to get into is these jobs also require new levels of skill from what we've asked people in my dad's generation, right? So let me tell you a couple of good things that are cool. So first of all, Kentuckiana Works is a $14 million agency. We get about half that money in a single grant that comes to us every year from the federal government called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And among the things we've done is created this cool program called Code Louisville. So when you see we're going to need a lot of people to do business and information technology, it turned out when the mayor and other people started looking at the data, we needed a lot of software coders, 500, 600, 700 open jobs. There was no program locally for people to learn how to become software coders. None. Zero, right? So we got hustling and started something. We're using a company that the library, my friend Julie Skoski and others, Craig Buteau, brought to town called Treehouse, which is out of Portland, Oregon. But we're essentially giving people this fantastic online curriculum, but we're pairing them with mentors from the tech community, and they're meeting up every week, working together as a group for 12 weeks, and they're learning software coding. A fellow named Obama came to town last April, and he gave a shout out to Louisville about Code Louisville, because we're one of the 21 cities in the country that are part of the president's Tech Hire Initiative, right? And he knows that what we're doing here is cutting edge stuff. It's Yukon level stuff, right? It's a level above the kind of things we've typically done here. So I'm very proud of it. And what I wanted to show you is, this is a picture of one of the classes that graduated last summer. And all I want you to see is the diversity in the number of people that are holding these things. When I went to the library, when we had, after Obama came, the first class after Obama, we were hoping we would have 100 people in that class. After the Obama speech, we had 266 people starting Code Louisville last spring. We had to start a new class in July we didn't plan. We had to start a class in September we didn't plan. And we're getting diversity, male, female, black, white. Tons of people coming through this kind of thing. Now we're trying to get them placed into jobs. Let me shift to Kentucky Manufacturing Career Center. This is another thing we do with your taxpayer money. My dad worked at Ford. My Uncle Danny worked at GE. Luckily for us, both companies made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in investments in their plant. And they're now coming to us saying, we need to find people. Where are we going to get them? So we opened at the old Naval Ordnance. It's called the Airport Industrial Center now, something called the Kentucky Manufacturing Career Center. And we have trained, we've placed over 700 people in manufacturing jobs in the last 3 years. And we've trained almost 300 people with a new credential that nobody had ever heard of before we brought it to town, called the Certified Production Technician. And now GE likes it so much, they're stating a preference for it as they're hiring new people. And they've challenged us to triple the number of people that are running through these classes. So we have great things happening. This is a picture of what a job fair looks like, and we have a single place where we can organize this. Over 100 manufacturing employers are working with us. This is a fellow named Thomas who was working for $8.50 an hour. He came to the Career Center, and when he heard that the training was going to take 4 weeks, he walked out. He said, I can't afford to take off 4 weeks of work. The security guard caught him at the door and said, I really urge you to go back and hear these people out. He sat through the orientation, went back and talked to his family. His family figured out a way to help him pay his bills for a month while he took the training. He earned the Certified Production Technician. Now he's working at GE. He makes twice what he made before. GE loves him. He loves GE. There are dozens of these stories, right? We know how to do this kind of stuff in terms of helping people get training. So when we know where the jobs are, we can do something about trying to help people, right? But now I want to knock down a myth that's out there, if I can. Some of us who are old, and I'm 54 today, as you've heard, right, realize that recession we just went through in 2008 and 2009 and 2010 was not the same kind of thing that we normally call a general old recession. It was a gigantic, gigantic thing, right? And so there's no question that if you had somebody in your family who came out and was a French literature major in 2009, they might have struggled to find a job. And the press has been littered with these stories about the fact that college graduates can't find jobs and they're buried in debt, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But when you look at the jobs in Louisville that are going to pay above $45,000 a year, 3/4 of those jobs require post-secondary education, and most of them require a college education or more. So if you're trying to advise anybody in your family or anybody in your neighborhood what's the best thing to do, the best thing to do is to go get a bachelor's degree or beyond. at least an associate's degree, because otherwise you're in that tiny little 26% that is shrinking by the day, right? So don't kid yourself that there's much of that, and this is another way of demonstrating the same data. If you're saying, look, the one thing I want to do is ensure that you have a job and ensure that you have the best chance of making above that $45,000 a year, at every education level, the unemployment rate goes down and the pay goes up, right? And what you see is for people, this is Louisville data, for people that have a high school degree only, they are not making $45,000 a year. Their median salary is in the 20s. So don't kid around. Yes, you can find anecdotes of somebody with a college degree who's working at Starbucks. Yes, there are people who went and got degrees in all kinds of things, at all kinds of schools, at all kinds of prices, right, and took on all kinds of debt. That was not particularly intelligent. We want to talk to people about that. But we are right in sending them the message, higher education pays. That's what we said in the 90s, and it's still true. And if you think it isn't, you can find, I challenge you to find the data to support your position, because I have lots to support mine. Now, let me show you this, because this is the kind of conversation we want to start having with young people and others going back to school that we haven't been before. The mistake we made, Henry, is that we always basically told people, go to college. Whatever you do, go to college. And we treated college like the same thing no matter what you were going to major in. Now, again, my friend Mark knows I've got a son who's graduating from YPAS who's getting ready to go to be a music major. The data about music majors isn't that great, right? But I'm talking to him about this now. But let me explain to you what this chart shows. If you break down college majors into 7 big groups, right? This is data for people that went to school in our area, graduated, and went to work in our area. And what it shows you is for people that the left-hand side of the chart is what they were making as a group, their median salary 3 years in, 3 years after they graduated, and the right-hand part of the tail of the megaphone is 7 years out. What this shows you is for people that majored in science, technology, engineering, and math, or people that majored in health, 3 years after graduation, they were already, their median pay was above $45,000 a year. So if you've got somebody in your family who's thinking about investing money to go be an engineer, or to go be a nurse, or a doctor, or a respiratory therapist, there's good evidence to suggest to them that they're going to make good money, and that's a good investment, right? You see that the folks who are majoring in business and education take a little longer to get right to the right side of that 45,000 degree line, but they do, right? Now the challenge here, and I say this again, first of all, I said Duke out loud, which I normally don't do, especially in March. I was a philosophy and political science major, right? So you have to be thinking what you're going to do with these kinds of skills, right? And so this data shows, at least for our market, people that major in arts and humanities or in trades that includes things like culinary, right, or social sciences, the data isn't particularly great that you're going to get above that 45,000 degree line. So the conversation we want to have with people is, if you're thinking about taking on $50,000 or $100,000 of debt, and you're going to get a job that's going to pay you $30,000 a year, that's not smart, right? But the other thing we know, and given that President McGowan from Bellarmine just passed away a week or two, he was the leading proponent of liberal arts education in our community, and he was a fantastic person, right? If you do a word cloud, which I should have brought for you, of all the things that employers are looking for when they say they're looking for skills, it's as if they described a philosophy major, because they're looking for writing and reading and communication and critical thinking skills. So there are reasons to think these liberal arts degrees are going to start paying more, because this data may be a little distorted by the fact that we just went through the worst recession in 80 years, right? Now let me shift a little bit to summer jobs and why summer jobs are important, and why Mayor Fisher talks so much to you about it when he comes and does the State of the City every year. So when I was coming out of high school in 1980, it wasn't that hard to get a job. And it turns out back in 1980 and even 1994, this chart shows you the red line is the national and the blue is Kentucky. 55% of kids in 1990 or 1994, whatever's at the left-hand side, worked. So if teenagers wanted jobs, they could find them. That's why you all have this sense, like, what's the problem? Why can't people find jobs? It turns out by the time you get to 2015, only a third of young people, teenagers and young adults, are finding jobs, right? And you can imagine overall, that's true both for Kentucky and for the nation. You can imagine if that's the general number, Mark Worms' kid and my kid are going to have a better chance getting a job than the kid I'm mentoring who lives in Beecher Terrace, right? So when you run the numbers nationally for African Americans or kids in low-income zip codes, the numbers are horrifyingly low. That's why you hear the mayor speak with such passion about we've got to try to connect kids who don't have opportunities to these opportunities. Because the rest care folks are in the back. I want to give them a shout out. They run that Manufacturing Career Center for us. When we're talking to employers, the first thing they talk about is employability skills. Showing up on time, working in a team, taking direction from a supervisor. Where do you learn that? Not in school. You learn that from working. That's where you learn it. So the reason the mayor wants to get kids jobs is because we want them to learn the skills of work, and you learn them by working, not by going to a program. I can't teach that to you in a program because you'll come in late. You come in late once at work, the boss says you do that again, you're fired. That gets your attention in a totally different way, right? So this is just one picture. I could give you dozens of them of young people speaking at press conferences with the mayor. The kids in the green shirt worked at Norton. Some of these kids worked at Kroger. Some have worked at Thornton's. Fantastic employers. We're signing up more all the time, right? And you see the mayor really with renewed vigor trying to encourage everyone in this room to hire at least one kid this summer. So if anybody's interested in doing that, come see me afterward, or I can take you to a website, summerworks.org. Could not be easier. There's a button that says for employers. Click the button, fill out the job description form. I already have 1,100 kids that have signed up for jobs. And I haven't really even started trying to get them. We just had the press conference with the mayor last Monday. Now, let me show you one other thing here that's not off the subject, but it's related. So first of all, when I showed you Code Louisville and the Manufacturing Career Center, I was describing to you that we're using federal money, and we're proud to do so, right? It turns out that Congress and the federal government are giving organizations like Kentuckiana Works about 40% less today than we had in 2000 to try to either connect people to jobs or to get them in job training scholarships or programs that help them get skills to be able to be competitive in the economy. So we have a lot less. Then you say to yourself, well, what are we doing as a state to invest in the skills of people? The primary way that we do that is through higher education. So this chart is just showing you a very simple graph. What has Tennessee done in its investments for higher education over the last 15 years, and what has Kentucky done, right? Because Tennessee has a Republican governor and a Republican legislature. So I come across like a Democrat probably because I work for a Democratic mayor and I happen to be a Democrat, but that is totally irrelevant to this conversation. That is a Republican state. Take a look at what they're doing with higher education, right? Go back to that chart I showed you about Nashville before, right? Nashville has managed to be the Yukon of our competitors when it comes to basketball, right? If we were going to put them, they are now winning championships, and year after year, people expect them to compete. If you go to the Nashville Chamber's website, they do not compete with Louisville. They think of their competition as Atlanta and Charlotte, and they are trying to attract talent from New York and Los Angeles and big cities, right? Now, that's the reason why the mayor talks about innovation economy. That's why people like me are so focused on trying to get people to the talent level that we want to get them to, because we can't grow the economy the way we want unless we have talent to fill those kinds of jobs. So when I'm talking to you or getting you to think about UConn versus WKU, if we don't do anything to change where we're going in Louisville, we're going to be better than some. Just like Western is better than some of the schools in its conference, which no one ever expects to win anything in basketball, because Western takes it seriously. We are a great city. We love living here. We have a lot of strengths, right? So people will see it, and we are generating talent. Our schools are improving. U of L's graduation is improving. Bellarmine is doing great things. There are lots. Galen is in the room. There are lots of great institutions here. But my old chairman of the board, Bill Samuels from Maker's Mark, used to always ask me, don't tell me how we're doing against ourselves. Tell me how we're doing against our competition, right? And that's why I tried to put this in a March Madness frame, right? Because against ourselves, we're doing okay. But against our competition, some of them are moving to a different level. And the challenge we're going to have to take on and meet, I think, is to take that on around talent so that we can do this in the next 10 years in Louisville so that we become the next Portland, Austin, Nashville. And so just a couple of things to wrap up. One, summer works is really important. If we can't plug young people into these jobs when they're young, they do not learn the skills that you want them to have. They do not get exposed to the world of work. They have no idea what happens inside your companies. And if they don't know, they can't make intelligent choices about what they're doing educationally. So summer works is huge, right? We have to try to encourage Congress to invest more in the kind of skills training programs like the Manufacturing Career Center and Code Louisville that give people on-ramps to get the skills that allow us to fill these jobs. If you go to our website, KentuckyAndItWorks.org, we can show you by sector the number of job openings in these critical areas. Last quarter, there were 3,000 job openings in healthcare and 1,500 in IT. So there's no reason, that's the reason why if Kent Euler from GLI or the mayor goes to a meeting, they're like, we can't find people, because there's a mismatch between what they're asking for and what we're able to deliver. So we have to invest more in skills training, right? I would submit to you that we have to invest more in higher education, not less. So we can pretend for a while that there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the higher ed system. And I don't want to get political about what happens there or what the political stripes are of faculty, but the simple reality is true. If you were running the UConn basketball program and you said to yourself, 10 years in a row, I'm going to cut the budget. I'm not going to invest in the practice facilities. I'm not going to build a new gym. I'm not going to build suites. I'm not going to do things that are going to attract fans or players. There's no way in the world you would expect, after 10 years, to be making progress against your competitors. No way. But that's what we're doing in Kentucky, right? So Jim Ramsey at U of L, Ty Handy, the new president of JCTC, are getting ready to take their 11th budget cut in 11 years, right? And I will say to you, President Ramsey at U of L at least has other resources that he can tap to try to do important things at U of L, and they're doing a good job of that. The president at JCTC has zero, or almost zero. So when you cut a community college, there is nothing else for them to do except to pass that cost on to the kids that go. So when you hear people bemoaning student loan debt and how much it costs to go, one of the reasons is because we're pushing that cost onto them. There's no way in my mind that we're going to have the kind of talent to compete with Nashville or to compete with Tennessee if we keep cutting that kind of investment, right? And lastly, you saw when I'm showing you the college majors slide, we at Kentucky and It Works are going to work really hard to try to get information out to everybody about what happens if I major in philosophy. What are the outcomes that are likely for me here? So we're developing an app that's going to be ready for people's phones by the summer. We're going to be working with the school districts everywhere and across our 12 county. It's going to be local data that's going to be able to tell you by occupation, if you want to be an accountant, how many do we have, how many do we need, what skills are required, and what education is required. You can do it by occupation, by income level, or by major. So there are good things we can do, but again, go back to my frame, and hopefully the metaphor isn't completely worn out. You can hear from the enthusiasm in my voice. I'm proud that we're sort of a Western Kentucky university, but I'm really hungry to turn us into a UConn, and in order to do it, we're going to have to do more. Let me end, Mr. President, by just saying I want to give a shout out to the members of the Rotary. More than any other group I've come across in Louisville, you all walk the walk of this kind of stuff. So whether it's people like Henry that I know personally or the people in this group, the things you're doing at Iroquois and Western are exactly the right thing. The Rotary Promise is exactly the right thing. The guy who just won the award, Mr. King in the back, is doing exactly the right thing to try to create on-ramps. We cannot afford to leave these people behind if we're going to try to have the kind of economy that's going to grow at the rate that Nashville, Charlotte, and Austin have been. So with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much. We're going to open up the microphones for Rotarians to ask questions. And just remember our 3 rules. Rotarians only may ask questions, 30-second time limit. Please don't tell us who your favorites are for the NCAA pick. Senator, you're asking? You're not asking. Back up. Go ahead. Clint.
Hi. As an employer that hires 100 high school students every summer for seasonal employment, I'm really curious about your certification program. And committed to teenage unemployment, how do we help our high school students gain that certification before they leave high school?
So the manufacturing certification in particular is something we're experimenting with this summer for the first time, because GE has pledged to hire 100 kids if we can get them part of that certification before they start this summer. And if I can get that to work for GE this summer, I'm hoping to bring it back to lots of other manufacturing companies next year and say, if you all want kids with this kind of skill, how many would you take? Because I can work with JCPS schools to produce it. And then what's exciting is if that model works, I can go find other certifications that mean something to employers and try to get JCPS to deliver that as well. So that's the model that we're moving to over the next 18 months. Does that answer the question? Tell me what certification you were talking about, because I'm worried if you didn't say manufacturing. What company are you?
I work with the Boy Scouts.
Okay.
And actually we're concerned, our major concern is teenage unemployment, helping kids get into the workforce where they belong.
Right. Well, so I mean, the other thing that you all do, I'm sure, that's very helpful to young kids is just that sort of soft skills prep that you all do, that your award winner won earlier today. Right. The handshake, the resume prep, the how do I handle these kinds of things, because a lot of these kids have never had any exposure or anybody coaching them on that. So,
Bill.
Bill Schnatter. Seems to me if you do your job well, then pretty soon we don't have enough jobs available. How do we create more jobs?
Well, so first of all, we're at a place now where the unemployment rate is below 5%. So people in my job, these are the good days because the tide is in, but you're right, almost every company we're working with is hiring. Nobody's laying off. Everybody's hiring, which is a good problem to have, right? So you have to do a couple of things. You got to find people that are underemployed and move them up. And the way you do that is to get them into these skills trained, like Thomas, so you move them from 850 to 16. That's one thing you do. The second thing you do is the example you are doing at Iroquois. You take these kids that look like they're on the sideline and help them get the kind of prep they need to get them in the game as opposed to on the sideline. And then the third piece that we don't have time to talk a lot about today is talent attraction. So we know Austin added that many jobs not by just finding Austin kids to polish up and put in. Austin became a magnet for talent. Nashville is a magnet. I was in Nashville 2 weeks ago. They claim they're growing by 10,000 people a month. Now, I don't know if I misheard it, because I'm middle-aged, as you heard, but that's what I heard. So Nashville is growing and attracting people, and what you want to be is one of those cities where people say, I'm going to go to Louisville, and then I'll figure out where to work, right? That's what Portland has, that's what Austin has, and that's what Nashville is becoming. That's got to be our goal, because then talent attraction also helps you fill in those jobs, because the jobs become the pull for the talent. So,
David.
Hi, Michael. David Dunn. Most of the people in the room probably know that we've lost some high-level jobs from Yum to the state of Texas. I wonder if there's a common theme among Austin, Nashville, with the tax environment. I wonder how Kentucky's tax environment helps or hurts job attraction.
So I'm not an expert about this, but I will quote my friend Joe Reagan, who used to run GLI for many years. When we would compete with Nashville for jobs or sort of corporate locations, relocations, he would point out that there were times that the fact that Tennessee does not have a state income tax was relevant to the CEO's choice of where they were going to live. He said if the CEO is going to make $1 million a year and they're going to pay $60,000 a year in taxes in Kentucky and zero, now they're going to pay somehow, but they're still thinking I'm going to pay 60 in income versus zero. That's the Porsche I like to drive every year. That is relevant. Now, I think that becomes an argument for the broad conversation about tax reform at the state level, which everybody knows we need, but no one's willing to do. I have no idea why, right? So I do think that Texas does not have a state income tax either, as far as I know. Now, again, they have very high property taxes and sales taxes, so you still have to pay for your schools and your higher ed and all that kind of stuff. But it's a relevant conversation that I think is worth exploring.
Alice?
Hi, Michael. Alice Bridges. Wanted to ask you about transportation. So how does what you're doing intersect with getting people to where the jobs are?
So thank you for the question. So again, as a person who lived in Boston and took the T to work for 7 years, a person who lived in New York for 7 years and took the subway to work every day for 7 years, Louisville is a challenge because oftentimes what you have is jobs growing in the Northeast and people looking for jobs in the West and the South. And TARC is another one of these places that's funded primarily either through federal money or local. Nothing is growing. They don't have enough money to do all that they want, so we have trouble getting people from where they live to where the jobs are. That's just a challenge. And again, we don't have, I have friends who live in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where they're building light rail. You fly to Denver, they have light rail. We did a city visit to Portland, they have light rail. We have nothing like that. So this is a real challenge for Louisville, and these quality of life things also become things that set our competition apart from us in terms of if a company wants to come in, how are my workers going to get here? Right? Because we don't have a good answer for that right now if they're moving out there. Now again, Barry Barker and his team at TARC are very willing to work with people to be flexible. I don't want to be sounding critical, but they have a resource challenge, right? And so our summer jobs kids all get TARC passes in the summer. So if I can get them anywhere on TARC, I can get them there. But let me just give you one example. The Amazon folks down in Bullitt County are hiring hundreds and hundreds of kids. But to my knowledge, the TARC bus at the moment goes down and stops at the exit before where Amazon is. So every morning, I'm told, I've never seen this, you can go down to that exit and watch people get off the bus and walk the mile from the exit. And the reason I'm told they do this is because they have to get the bus to turn around, pick up the Mount Washington people, and bring them back to Louisville, because that's its primary function. But so we have these problems that are just hard to solve, right? I've got lots of urban kids who want jobs. I've got Amazon asking for them, and I don't have the obvious way to make a match that you would think. It's a real challenge.
Steve.
Steve Eggers. Don't really have a question. I just have a suggestion, I guess. Back many moons ago, probably in the 80s, there was a program, I think it was called SKIP. And the city and Jefferson County were together where if you had a contract for services with the city, you were required to hire a student for the 2 semesters, and you paid half their salary, and the other half was paid by the city. We probably had 4 or 5 kids go through our program. And later, a number of them were very successful, and it always mystified me that program seemed so successful. Was not.
So I moved back to Louisville in 2000, so that predates me. I have never heard of that, but I will certainly investigate it. It sounds like a promising
Maybe
idea.
somebody in the city still remembers it.
Yeah. Great.
How is Cincinnati and Indianapolis doing compared to us?
So Indianapolis in particular is another one of these cities whose job growth is much bigger than ours. Cincinnati's is more modest, but Indianapolis in particular, we had one chart where you could see Charlotte and Indianapolis sort of jumping up. Both their wages were moving up and the size of their economy is growing. Cincinnati's is more modest.
Wow. Okay, great. Any more questions? If not, Michael, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it very much.